What's up, everyone? We are here today with Tim Hong, who is the Chief Product Officer at MoneyLion. And just to kind of frame the conversation, I recently wrote an article about Cashflow underwriting, kind of hitting on all the benefits it has for risk splitting. But the article was focused on some of the challenges I see with consumer adoption. And literally the day after I wrote the piece, in my LinkedIn feed, I found a piece that Tim and team had produced around their partnership with Plaid, a product called Layer and Consumer Report, which literally head on hit on some of the challenges I put out in the article. So I'm excited to talk to Tim today and get his take on what they've built. So Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your role at MoneyLion.
Yeah, I'm the, as you mentioned, the Chief Product Officer at MoneyLion. I lead up the global product team. I also lead up, I'm head of the engine business. So this is a enterprise and consumer marketplace business where we offer embedded marketplace technologies, which we'll dive into a little bit further.
I noticed on your LinkedIn you've been at MoneyLion almost 10 years. I don't see that all that often in the tech community these days. Like what keeps you at MoneyLion?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible journey, certainly professionally, also personally. From early on, we've been really focused on kind of this mission around empowering financial decision making. And I think what's been rewarding is that we've taken this kind of first principles approach to getting there, which, often means a different approach, in fact. So yes, we started in first party products, banking, cash advance, a lot of things that the MoneyLion brand is actually known for. But over time, over the last few years in particular, we've expanded into content. How do we provide content that inspires action into marketplaces? How do we actually provide consumers selection through marketplaces to this very rich ecosystem of financial product providers that exist out there? And ultimately to enterprise solutions, because we found that if we could power others' financial decision-making, they certainly are experts in building community and their own user base, and perhaps we could power those solutions with our data, right? And so I think that's been incredibly rewarding for me personally as that evolution has gone on. And finally, it sounds rote to say, but we have an incredible team and culture. Working, with the best in the business in an environment that's always exciting and fast paced and all this other stuff is incredibly rewarding as well.
That is awesome. I think that as you were describing MoneyLion, it reminded me of some of the time I spent at Credit Karma.
Yeah, I
with
can
kind of
imagine.
like the people, the culture. Fortunately, I still get to work with many of the folks over there. Kind of the course of working with our clients. So you wrote this piece called "The Power of Cashflow Underwriting with Instant Onboarding: Introducing Layer and Consumer Report." I think a piece kind of co-authored by Plaid team and you all. You mentioned a product called Layer and Consumer Report, which kind of starts to surface some of the cash flow data and open banking data to lenders in your engine marketplace. Before we dig into kind of the specifics of that product, tell us about the engine marketplace, because I think everything's kind of connected to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As mentioned, it's an embedded financial marketplace solution, right? And so what does that mean? We work with over 1,200 partners in a two-sided network. So for our channel partners or our so-called supply partners, we drive monetization and engagement. So let's say you're a publisher like a CNBC, you might use one of our solutions to monetize your traffic, and we provide those kind of embedded solutions for of course, not just publishers, but other financial product providers, other marketplaces, so on and so forth. We power a lot of those solutions. And then on the other side of the network, we drive consumer acquisition fundamentally for those financial product providers, personal loans, savings accounts, financial wellness solutions, so on and so forth, that want to acquire users at scale. And, I think what's kind of distinct, of course, about financial products is that the consumer picks the product, but the product also needs to pick the consumer, right? It's very rare that kind of e-commerce type of solution kind of works in both ways like that. And so ultimately matching is incredibly important. So we match consumers with the financial solutions they not just need, but also qualify for. And, in doing so, we receive over 85 million customer inquiries every quarter, really driving kind of, again, that matching between what people want and what is available.
I tend to think of the marketplace as like the former Even Financial, and I know you all made that acquisition. Am I thinking about it the right way in that it's primarily personal loan products,
That's
or
right. The history of it is in 2022, MoneyLion acquired what was then called Even Financial, has now been rebranded to Engine. Again, that was kind of formed out of this notion that as we were serving our customers, how do we provide a broader set of products to them? Also, again, kind of being more in that B2B to C realm, we're big believers in this kind of hybrid approach that you have a direct to consumer side and then a B2B side, because, if you think about kind of the distribution you can get, the diversity you can get of channels, that model where we're providing embedded solutions means that, instead of consumers solely coming to MoneyLion or solely coming to us, we're also meeting or helping meet the customer where they are, where they're making decisions, where they're kind of in time and place of these kind of financial shopping moments. And so I think, that's fundamentally why we expanded and why we really believe in this kind of hybrid B2B to C approach.
got it? If I'm a consumer, how would I know I'm using the Even Financial? Is it like kind of a behind the scenes technology, or are there brands that you're related with that?
It's both. I mean, to get into the nuts and bolts, there's a number of our partners that have integrated with our APIs, and so things may be powered by us without even knowing it, but we also provide a set of co-branded flows and modules, so someone can get started. Like a publisher obviously may not have extensive dev resources, right? And so they can get started with a simple link or an embed. And you might see all throughout the internet things that are powered by MoneyLion. That is fundamentally one of our flows, right? And so a lot of times consumers may not even know it, but I think one thing I'd love to touch on is just how we're almost creating that brand experience is really important for us, because for one of our partners who's maybe not in financial services or not a financial provider, they can always come back to our brand as someone they trust in terms of where they submit their information to and who is facilitating the transaction itself, and who is ultimately collecting all this, whether it's PII or bank data information. We're making sure that it's safe and secure within our walls.
Got it. So you mentioned was it 85 million transactions per quarter roughly, and 17 million users, like it was kind of cited in the article. Like how fast? I guess two questions here. How fast is the consumer side of the marketplace growing? And like, what can you tell us about the users? Like, what are the demographics of the folks you serve?
Yeah, I mean, I think one part of our approach is that, I'll answer your question from the second one first. So in terms of the demographics, it really reflects the Gen Pop. So for instance, you might have a publisher where that traffic is coming in primarily through SEO or SEM. Someone's searching for or researching, how to pick a personal loan or things like that, right? And they might be going through that kind of channel. Another might be, for instance, our declines as an example. So a partner like SoFi might, of course, cannot approve every single user that comes through their walls to their financial products, and they'll embed they do embed our technology in order to be able to monetize and provide that user some value beyond the decline, right? And then we have others that are even more specific, almost point of sale type use cases. So as a result of that, there's this wide plethora of marketing strategies that sit kind of above those channel partners, and so we get this really broad diversity of consumer that reflects Gen Pop. Everyone from super prime all the way down to non-prime, right? In terms of credit profile, but also from an age standpoint, and a market standpoint, very diverse as well. For us, the marketplaces, to your first question, are marketplaces across our consumer and enterprise sides are our fastest growing businesses. They're the areas that we've really found that we have a solution that abstracts all of these kind of problems you might find, right? Like even a basic one, like if you're looking to create to become a to be able to offer marketplaces to your consumers, in the past, maybe you had to do one by one API connections. You might have to even manage the real boring things, but they're really important, like your pay, like how are the payouts being done? How are you targeting? How are you finding the right audience? How are you driving kind of a positive flywheel? And we have entire kind of partner solutions and technology teams and algorithms that kind of do that on your behalf. And you just have to kind of plug in a UI, which again can be as simple as a single line of code. So that's I think has really resonated amongst a broad set of enterprise clients.
Got it. Let's not get into like Layer, Plaid, Consumer Report. Tell us about the nature of your relationship with Plaid, and in general, talk to us about your open banking platform. Like what other data providers do you have in there? If I'm a lender that wants to find new customers, what can I expect in the Engine marketplace?
Well, I think to our earlier kind of point I was making, like this is such a unique shopping experience in the sense that financial services, that is, because matching the user with what they want and what they qualify for is so important, right? And so matching is, of course, ultimately predicated by data. And, over the years, there's some clear ways that marketplaces have approached these kind of problems. Probably the most obvious or most common is that, as you go through marketplaces, there are credit bureau pulls that sit at the top at the distribution channels, fundamentally, that aid in that matching, right? The most kind of old school version of this is direct mail. Why does direct mail still live? Why are we kind of killing all these trees still? It's because, fundamentally there are bureau matching mechanisms or targeting mechanisms through the firm offer of credit or pre-screen that are really powerful for finding the user that actually meet your needs. And of course, there's digital versions now with, as you very well know and have written about, Credit Karma and Lightbox and things like that, right? I think what we found is that, and so of course, Engine has the same. We call it Spark. We have hosted the ability to host decisioning models, and that includes credit bureau data as well. What we saw, and this is kind of our segue into open banking, is that we were seeing inefficiencies still in targeting and matching. And that's fundamentally because what's present in that kind of up funnel distribution or marketing channel decisioning still was different than what was downstream, right? And that's not only a matter of decisioning, but the information needed to be able to make that decision. We're so used to PII giving, as lenders or as distribution platforms, the PII unlocking all this information around like credit bureau data or other data, right? But fundamentally, if you see what's happening with open banking, that PII is not sufficient to unlock that data. So one aspect, you have a difference in information. Secondly, you have a friction point in terms of you being able to access that information. It's not like you can use PII and simply access someone's bank account transaction data or cash, the cash flow, right? So those two things, which are, cousins or two sides of the same coin, was a market inefficiency that, frankly, from our standpoint, was leading to a worse user experience. Someone would presented an offer of some sort, and then downstream be declined for some reason, right? Or see some sort of friction that would lead them to drop off. And so that's kind of the market need. And so we started working with our partners to be able to, our ecosystem partners to be able to kind of build that.
Can you say more about the PII not being enough to unlock the open banking? Like what are the things that you need to unlock that
Yeah,
data
well, I
set?
mean, like the most basic is, and I'm sure many folks have experienced this in their kind of day-to-day lives as consumers, is part of the power of open banking and part of the kind of regulatory framework here is that it's user permissioned, right? And that fundamentally that user permission comes in the form of an affirmation, of course, from the consumer, but also them putting in their bank credentials into an aggregator such as Plaid and others in order to permission their bank data to the party they see fit, right? And so oftentimes it's using a username and password. And that is obviously just your bank account. And obviously that is not part of a typical loan application form that you might see on a platform. And so you could see where the lender now has, there's certainly value there. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but in terms of this kind of data, but now they have to go get it themselves, right? Versus, of course, with credit bureau data, they're given this set of PII, name, address, SSN, et cetera, and can simply do data pulls based on that, and as well as a user permission as well.
Got it. There was a short video that was included in the article that MoneyLion and Plaid released on this. And here's what it looked like to me, and maybe help me understand if I got it right. But it was a user showing up, I presume looking for a loan or a financial product. They entered their phone number and they hit a button, and then all this like magical stuff was happening on the other side of that. Like, can you walk us through what's actually happening there in that layer experience, and like what's happening on the back end to enable that experience for people?
Yeah, so I mean, here at Engine, we obviously, as I mentioned before, actually are managing that consumer experience. We don't just have APIs, we actually provide these flows, these embeds, these application flows. And so we're always really focused on, well, what constitutes an amazing experience from a consumer standpoint, and how can we use an ecosystem of partners to, well, frankly, to provide that experience? Because oftentimes we're looking at how do we augment that data in a more, in still a very clear way to the consumer, but a less kind of laborious way to the consumer. So how do we use third-party data pulls to augment data? Of course, how do we identify fraud that might, as folks are using like a robots or whatever to go through our flows, and ultimately, some of the downstream, as we mentioned, these kind of more traditional data pulls. With Layer, we were really excited to be able to leverage that solution because, we're both on the Plaid side as well as the Engine side. What we're doing is that oftentimes we see the same user come back over and over. And I think you asked earlier, how do I know I'm using MoneyLion or Engine? The reality is we see users use us for multiple products, not just say personal loans. And as a result, we see a lot of returning customers as they come through our embed. In some cases, they might be going through like two different channels of ours. And we're able to say to ourselves, can we identify that this is the exact same user and give them a more streamlined experience as a result? Now, Plaid, of course, is doing the exact same thing. Folks are using Plaid multiple times in multiple places. And so Plaid is also doing their own kind of, for lack of a better word, pre-fill, as they're identifying who that user is, and they can confirm they are who they say they are. We're doing, frankly, the same as well. It's almost like you might imagine as a checkout experience, right? We're all very familiar with Shopify or other mechanisms where, you just verify who you say you are, and then you have your wallet available. That's a lot like the concepts that we're talking about here.
Got it. So you mentioned this earlier, and it resonated with me around the concept of to access some of this open banking data, and particularly the cash flow information, the customer needing to put their kind of bank login and credentials in there. I didn't see that being required in the experience you all showed and were demoing. Did I see that correctly, or is there some other way you all are getting access to the information that does not require the credentials?
Yeah, it certainly varies depending on the bank and the financial institution, but you can imagine in our happiest path, I guess you could say, right? Happiest path is we've really verified you are who you say you are with no uncertainty at all. You're a quote unquote returning user, um, and you've identified who you are. You can imagine that, well, in some cases, you might already have those credentials or already have that kind of bank link in the infrastructure. And therefore, you can, once you identify they are who they say they are, you don't need to ask for those credentials again, right? So maybe the first time you see a user, you might need to kind of ask for all these things. But the second time or subsequent times, you can streamline that process,
Oh,
certainly.
got it. Okay, so it sounds like you all are making a bet that because you see users multiple times, they'll trust you on the first time, but then as they need to use it again, you can make that experience like really frictionless because you
Exactly.
remember them. Okay,
Yeah, and
got it.
as I
Okay,
mentioned, Plaid Layer is their product to do that. Engine is also kind of doing that because there's questions, for instance, about like more like demographic questions as an example that Engine collects as part of our flows. Things like uh, 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 could be anything from education level to self-reported data that we're also augmenting and also going through a very similar kind of returning customer experience that again streamlines it for subsequent customers. I think ultimately we're moving towards a world where when we talk about user permission, we're talking about, how do we put consumers in control of this kind of wallet, right? So if you imagine, um, one version of a wallet, of course, is your shipping address and your credit cards and all that kind of stuff. That's useful for being able to transact with an e-commerce site. But what's going to help someone transact and feel in control when we're talking about financial products? We're talking about maybe your PII, your bank data. Like I can prove that my income is what it is, right? And being able to kind of permission and package that for who the consumer wants them to get that information, not just
got
kind
it.
of spread out all over the internet.
Got it. I've I've gone through. I've used Plaid many times over. Kind of signing up for usually a deposit product of some kind. Like I think last time I remember using it, I probably was opening like a Coinbase account like many
Well,
years ago.
if I can interrupt you for a second, what's
Yeah,
great
but
is I
yeah.
recently got an invoice from a like a gardener or a landscaper, right? I think they were using a small business platform like QuickBooks. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I paid that invoice using a pay by bank product offered by Plaid, in fact. So you have this kind of like you're seeing it more and more. This kind of open banking mechanism get spread out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because in my context, it was a transaction I was seeking to complete. But I,
Yeah,
I wanted to fund the Coinbase account with like a checking account that I have. And one of the options was just, okay, username and password. Boom. It's very easy. I don't need to find routing numbers, account numbers, etc. I've never given my bank credentials in a lender context. And honestly, I haven't even been asked. Like the brands I have like Chase, Amex cards, that sort of thing. I've not seen them use Cashflow data yet. I imagine they're thinking about it or already have some products out there. But I guess where I'm going with my thought here is your context with customers is a little different, given that they're typically shopping for a loan. What have you learned around what gets people comfortable sharing bank credentials in that context?
yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think it sounds super basic, but there's kind of the clarity is really important. I would kind of divide. I'll just kind of share some numbers that we've seen into the actual linking of the account versus the opting into the process. So when we explain why someone should link their bank account, which is really about the quality of their offers as well as streamlining the application flow, we've seen in our consumer base, over 90% opt in to basically saying, yes, I'm willing to do that, right? The second part, of course, is that there's still friction in actually, people forget their passwords or things like that. I think, and I've compared notes with others, typically speaking, you see 70 to 80% success in that kind of process because, again, people just like literally forget their passwords. But as mentioned, kind of flows like Layer or variants thereof kind of looking to close that gap in terms of kind of like making that easier and easier. So, of course, there's some amount of friction, but that's actually a good thing, right? I mean, I think if you talk to a lot of lenders, they wouldn't, and you would know this better than anyone, like a one click, like, okay, the loan's going out, like all these things, one click is sometimes feels a little bit too little friction. And so a little bit of friction to make sure like there's an informed consumer, that you have like a positive selection approach, like all of these kind of things can be really helpful. And so we've seen that isn't a huge barrier to conversion rates, but I think that's an area that continues to evolve too.
Cool. So if again, I'm putting kind of my lender hat on here, and I'm hearing, okay, you have this large marketplace, you have growing consumer base, you have access to not only credit bureau data, but you have cash flow data. Talk to us about like the granularity of that information. I'm assuming I can see like cash in and out of a checking account, that sort of thing, but can I start to hone in on like what kind of stuff they're spending money on? Like how rich is this information, and how do you see lenders using it in their
Well,
underwriting?
it's incredibly rich. And I think though that is, well, let me back up a little bit. So MoneyLion as a whole is very familiar with this kind of data, right? We were using this from our founding days in terms of being able to better understand someone's income, cash flow, not like where they're spending money, but kind of how does their kind of balance sheet play out. And there weren't very good tools there. If you look at income estimators or other things like that, sometimes they're based on W-2s or other kind of data. And ultimately, we were seeing a lot of folks with multiple jobs, right? Multiple income, different types of income, whether it's from a government or child payments or your standard 9 to 5 or hourly. And there was quite a bit of income volatility. Cash flow data became the best way to understand that, certainly on a net basis versus gross basis as well, right? So gross, of course, is useful, but net is oftentimes the thing that tends to be actually even more important, right? And so understanding that and the expenses, not looking at like how many times are they going to McDonald's, because you can't do that. You certainly can't make lending decisions based on that, but more about, how can we verify income? How do we make sure that this person, frankly, has ability to pay, as an example, right? Even beyond the score. So that data certainly is all there. Now, I want to kind of clarify MoneyLion and Engine's role in this. A lot of times what we're doing is actually providing the platform to facilitate these kind of decisions for our lenders, right? We're not trying to say you have to use cash flow data or or anything like that, or even a particular provider. There's a risk process that obviously goes on in terms of making a risk management process in terms of making these decisions about what thresholds and how to use it and all of that. And we want to be able to facilitate the targeting side. It could be anything from a verification of income, so targeting on a more verified income, all the way through to a more customized attribute-based model that is kind of bespoke to that lender. And of course, this is what Plaid's consumer report provides. But there's others out there, right? We also recently announced Nova Credit. They have their Cash Atlas and Income Navigator products that lenders use, and they can use those exact ones that they're already using. They can target on that in our platform. And so that's really fundamentally what we're facilitating. And so we're certainly seeing the industry evolve in terms of the use of this kind of data. Some folks are just starting off, and some folks are very sophisticated.
Got it. Question about your Spark platform. So if I'm a lender that only uses credit bureau data on the back end in my back end underwriting, and I hear about Cash Atlas and I hear about, the products you mentioned from Plaid, and I'm interested in using those for my targeting within Spark, am I still allowed to use that data, or am I only allowed to use the data if it's also living on the back end model?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Our stance is that, in terms of targeting, we're a targeting platform, not a credit decisioning platform, right? So a subtle difference, but an important difference in terms of, we don't make the final kind of credit decision there, right? Because again, we are not a CRA. We don't send, things like adverse action and things like that. That's what the lender is responsible for, because they're ultimately making that decision. Certainly in terms of Spark, though, the logistics of getting started is very, very easy. Just like you might host, on our platform, you can host, let's just even just say a traditional model, host it on our side, either being built through a decision tree, or by hosting some of the common models, PMML models or SageMaker models on our side. There's like a little bit of a list of the most popular ones that we support. And, I think the power of it is that, of course, there's attributes, let's say from TransUnion, right, that you can target based on. But with this data, you can also intermix the open banking data or Cashflow data, right? And so it gives you quite a bit of flexibility in terms of, being able to, for some folks, kind of integrate it into a baseline model, as an example, or you might take an approach that's more of like a swap in or swap out type of approach, right? Okay, if the credit score is below, I'm oversimplifying here, if the credit score is below X, I might, in that case, I might begin to bring in cash flow data or cash flow underwriting criteria. So that gives folks flexibility in terms of using it for their entire audience or even just a subset.
Got it. So is Spark, I want to make sure I'm understanding Spark and how it all connects correctly. Is Spark the decisioning engine that powers the engine marketplace? Is that
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So if I was a lender that wanted to kind of take advantage of the platform, the distribution you all have, and the data assets, like, what would the commercial agreement look like? And, what are some things I could do to kind of initiate a conversation with you all?
Yeah. Well, folks should feel free to email me. I'm at tim@moneylion.com. That's always a good place to start and put you in touch with the teams there. Look, the commercial agreements, there's certainly one for engine, and then there's a more fine-grained one for Spark in particular that's designed to, of course, protect our lenders and ensure that their models are theirs and private and secure, and in some cases we don't even, it's like a black box, we don't even have access to them, so it has that level of privacy as well. And oftentimes it's really about what data attributes you need that have already been through your risk management process, right? That's a great starting point, right? Okay, I need FICO 8, I need, XYZ, like a whole laundry list of stuff. Chances are we support it. I think then when we start to get into cash flow, of course, the one clarifying thing is that not all of our 85 million plus have bank data associated. Those leads don't all have bank data associated because, of course, it's user permissioned.
Right. What coverage do you have roughly?
Right
on
now,
that?
we're going from the starting with the MoneyLion consumer app, all those leads coming in through, and then we're expanding Q4 and beyond to other supply channels. So I would say that certainly our most valuable leads, I would say, have that data at pretty high penetration rates. And in that sense, for the leads that do have it, it's as simple as really setting out, again, the attributes, the decision criteria, and going through that. We're happy to facilitate that. I think that is oftentimes a discussion that's better with the underlying data provider, right? Let's say, does someone already have a relationship with Plaid and already uses their consumer report, or with Nova Credit and already uses Cash Atlas? Once you've made that decision, it's very straightforward for us to simply set it as a threshold, essentially, within the decision.
Got it. How much time should I budget if I had an initial conversation with you guys and I wanted to be up and running and in market? Like, how long does that onboarding normally take?
So let's say without Spark, so getting onboarded into Engine, there's an API integration, of course, for us to be able to, let's say if someone clicks your offer, being able to kind of get that offer and deliver it, right? So that's fairly straightforward, typically speaking, to get kind of started. That's a 2 to 4 week process. Spark, a little more involved. Oftentimes we're obviously have a set of resources on our side to implement your model, to verify and QA your model. Oftentimes, I would say the over under is roughly around 6 weeks to go through that. It's not an intense work every day kind of 6 weeks. It's more of like a back and forth and setting it kind of 6 weeks.
What haven't I asked so far that you think a cash flow based lender would want to know about your marketplace?
Well, I know that I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, you said earlier that you hadn't seen lenders, or at least in a lending context, we still have lower adoption of cash flow. I know one thing that really excites us about open banking, of course, is that, and we mentioned this earlier, there's 2 halves of it. There's all the cash flow stuff that's maybe using bank balance, cash flow data, income versus expenses, ability to pay, all this stuff. And then, of course, there's a bunch of stuff that's just like, how do we make the transaction easier? How do we have it so that we don't have to find our checkbooks or do micro deposits, or heaven forbid, and this obviously still happens, submit pay stubs or things like that can be higher friction. And I think that's what's exciting for us, is those 2. But I'm curious, kind of where you see the adoption across both those lines of use cases.
I spent a lot of time talking to lenders and kind of helping them optimize their programs across a lot of the different affiliate marketplaces. And the common theme I've seen over and over again is when your friction is minimized and your offer is competitive, that's when all the good things start to happen, right? You start to gain traction and growth, you get the positive select, your unit economics start to work, charge-off rates come down, all of that stuff. And when you start, and the lenders I've worked with or talked to that have a cash flow element to their underwriting, the normal pattern is they're unable to target the users they want up front because the marketplace doesn't have that information. By the time they reach that point of, hey, I need a little bit more information here to make a decision, they see a remarkable amount of drop off. I'm talking 70, 80% plus refuse or don't know their credentials. And it's hard for me to see how much of that is I don't know versus I don't want to. And then furthermore, you actually have a real credit decision behind that even when they provide the information, declines, let's say, half of them, right? And these same lenders are competing with unsecured lenders with a 1-page application where the targeting's matched front end and back end, and the approval rate's 80%. So the friction, the relative friction is just so jaw-droppingly different that they struggle to get traction in all the kind of some of the marketplaces I'm most familiar with. And obviously, I've yet to work with a lender that's adopted what you've described today with the Spark decisioning platform, the open banking on both sides, on targeting and decisioning. But I could imagine that working. And I can imagine it being a really great user experience, especially for those customers you described who you've seen before and now can just kind of fly through all of this very, very quickly. Because that funnel is going to compete with all the other unsecured funnels. And furthermore, it's going to open up pockets of users that just don't qualify for other options. And like what I'd love to see, in the near future is a marketplace that can actually tell those users up front before they've even engaged in an application of, hey, I know the following about you, your credit, your open banking, etc. And with confidence, you should apply for this product because like you're matched essentially, right? Like I've yet to see that deployment end to end yet, but I'm excited to see you all build it and talk more about it when it's ready.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have initial folks using it, and the benefits have been huge in terms of being able to especially streamline that post-click conversion, which, as you mentioned, like many platforms, the certainty of offer and the conversion rate drives a lot of kind of the ranking algorithms because we owe it to the consumer to put in front of them at the highest level those offers that have higher certainty, right? Like that's certainly a win-win-win for everybody. I think the one thing that we didn't touch on that we're also really excited about that is part of this, both Plaid as well as Nova Credit, but also kind of our other partnerships we're putting into place, is this notion of like, how can we, again, with consumer permission, not just kind of make that decision up front in Spark to be able to target better. How do we then securely, and again, with transparency and the user permission, pass along the access to that bank account to the lender that the consumer chooses? We have the technology. Now, this is going to get like a little nerdy, but like, we have, and this is the solution that we've built out with these partners, is just in the same way that we're passing PII, we're actually passing a token, a secure token, that then that lender can use with a Plaid, with a Nova Credit, to get that cash flow data directly without having to go through all of that credentials and things.
Got it.
Like, we know how this will, the technology is there, right? We just need to build the ecosystem. And I think these partnerships give our clients access to that in a way that, means that the downstream friction is far less. I think that's one thing that's like kind of gets into nerdy token land, but like,
no, I love it. I love it.
Magic.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah, no, it not only enables the credit decision, but it actually enables the lender to connect with their deposit account in a kind of unique way. So like, I don't know, like this is just a random example. If it's a rewards cash product that the person signed up for, maybe the lender can say, hey, I have your checking account. Do you want to set up auto redemption every $50? And it's just going to land in your bank account. Just click this button and it's done, right? So like little like surprise and delight moments you can start to build into the product when you have that token.
Have a user that is not just kind of opening, let's say, a credit card or a line like that, but also retained and a valuable customer in the day. Right.
Very cool. Tim, Money 2020 is coming up. Are you going to be there?
Yeah, the MoneyLion and Engine crew will be there. I'll be there. We are chatting with folks, both our current and prospective clients about these solutions. Like I said, we've already had a few adopt them to pretty meaningful improvements. So we're super excited to continue that conversation there.
That's awesome. Well, Tim, thanks again for joining us today. Enjoyed hearing about Spark and all the stuff you guys are building at MoneyLion. And look forward to keeping up with all the product updates.
Absolutely. A pleasure to join.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, there's a few things you can do. The easiest thing is just share episodes on social media. LinkedIn is I think, probably the best channel for that, but you can tag me on Twitter as well. Number 2 is if you have questions, if you have challenges, if you'd like to be on the show, and you want to have a jam session on a particular question or something you're struggling with. And then lastly, if you could leave a review here on whatever podcast platform you found the show, that'll help other people discover it. And so thanks for spending the time today, and I'll see you next time.